On July 20, 1969, humanity stood at the edge of a new era. Millions of people watched their television screens as Apollo 11 approached the surface of the moon. For generations, the moon had been a distant light in the night sky, unreachable and mysterious. Now, for the first time, human beings were preparing to step onto its surface. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins had been sent to complete what many believed was the greatest journey in human history. Armstrong and Aldrin descended toward the moon while Collins remained in orbit above them. When Armstrong placed his foot on the gray surface, the moment was broadcast around the world. Humanity had reached another world. But the images shown to the public revealed only part of what happened during the mission. Apollo 11 was officially a scientific expedition. The astronauts collected rock samples, photographed the surface, installed scientific instruments, and tested the limits of human survival beyond Earth. Yet during one of their journeys away from the lunar module, Armstrong and Aldrin discovered something unexpected. Near the edge of a shallow crater, their instruments detected a large empty space beneath the surface. The reading suggested the presence of an ancient lava tunnel, created billions of years earlier when the moon had still been volcanically active. The entrance was narrow, but the underground chamber extended far beyond the range of their lights. Inside the tunnel, the temperature was more stable than on the surface. Thick layers of rock provided protection against deadly solar radiation, extreme temperature changes, and small meteorite impacts. More importantly, traces of frozen water were detected within the surrounding rock. The discovery changed the purpose of the mission. The moon was no longer simply a place that humans could visit. It was a place where humans might one day live. During their final hours on the surface, Armstrong and Aldrin examined the tunnel as carefully as their limited equipment allowed. Every measurement pointed toward the same conclusion. With sealed habitats, reliable energy, and enough supplies, a small group of people could survive beneath the lunar surface for months or even years. When Apollo 11 returned to Earth on July 24, 1969, the astronauts were welcomed as heroes. The public celebrated the successful mission, but behind closed doors, a different conversation began. NASA officials, military advisors, scientists, and government representatives studied the secret findings from the lunar tunnel. The evidence suggested that permanent human settlements beyond Earth were possible. Until that moment, every space mission had been built around the same principle. Astronauts would leave Earth, complete their objective, and return home as quickly as possible. Apollo 11 introduced another possibility. Human beings could leave Earth and remain somewhere else. The moon appeared to be the obvious location for the first permanent colony. It was close enough to Earth for regular communication and emergency support. Its underground tunnels could protect settlers from radiation, and water might be extracted from frozen deposits. But the moon also had serious limitations. Its gravity was extremely weak. Its long days and nights created major energy problems. Its surface contained few resources that could support a large population. NASA scientists began looking farther into the solar system. Their attention turned toward Mars. Mars had a day almost as long as Earth's. It had seasons, polar ice, a thin atmosphere, and gravity stronger than that of the moon. The planet was cold, dry, and dangerous, but it offered something the moon could not. Mars could become a world. Soon after Apollo 11, a highly classified program was created. It was called Project Prometheus. Its purpose was not to send astronauts to Mars for a brief visit. Its purpose was to establish the first permanent human colony on another planet. The Apollo 11 crew became the foundation of the project. Neil Armstrong was chosen to lead the mission. Buzz Aldrin would supervise operations on the Martian surface. Michael Collins would control the orbital spacecraft and coordinate transportation between Mars and space. But 3 astronauts would not be enough to build a civilization. Project Prometheus required engineers, doctors, pilots, biologists, geologists, farmers, technicians, and construction specialists. A total of 48 people were selected. Each person had to learn more than one profession. A doctor also learned how to repair electrical systems. A pilot learned how to grow food in sealed greenhouses. Engineers trained in emergency medicine. Biologists learned how to operate vehicles and maintain life support equipment. On Mars, the loss of a single person could mean the loss of an entire field of knowledge. The mission would carry machines, energy systems, seeds, medical supplies, and construction equipment. But the most valuable cargo was information. Millions of pages of scientific knowledge were stored inside the spacecraft's computers. The archive contained medicine, engineering, agriculture, physics, chemistry, literature, music, history, and art. The settlers were not simply carrying tools to another planet. They were carrying a small copy of human civilization. For years, the Prometheus crew trained in isolated facilities. They lived in sealed habitats, survived on limited food and water, repaired damaged systems without replacement parts, and learned to make decisions without help from Earth. They understood that the mission might become permanent. Some would return home one day. Others might never see Earth again. On August 17, 1977, the Prometheus spacecraft was completed in Earth orbit. Its main structure was far larger than any previous space vehicle. Rotating living sections created artificial gravity during the long journey. Nuclear thermal engines provided the power needed to cross the distance between Earth and Mars. Before departure, the crew received their final messages from family and friends. Many of those messages were filled with pride. Others were filled with fear. The settlers knew they were leaving behind oceans, forests, rain, cities, and every human community that had ever existed. When the engines were activated, Prometheus slowly moved away from Earth. The planet became smaller with each passing day. Continents disappeared into blue and white patterns. Cities became invisible. Eventually, Earth looked like a bright star in the darkness. The journey to Mars lasted nearly 8 months. During that time, the crew exercised, maintained the ship, studied landing procedures, and prepared for the construction of the first settlement. The mission nearly ended on the 132nd day. A powerful solar storm struck the spacecraft. Radiation levels rose rapidly, forcing the crew into heavily protected emergency chambers surrounded by water tanks and supplies. For 14 hours, they remained inside while charged particles damaged communication equipment and disabled part of the main computer system. When the storm passed, the crew discovered that several navigation instruments had failed. They repaired what they could using spare components and pieces taken from less important systems. The event reminded them of the reality of their mission. They were too far from Earth to be rescued. If their ship failed, no second spacecraft could reach them in time. From that moment forward, Prometheus was no longer only a spacecraft. It was their entire world. On April 3, 1978, Mars appeared before them. At first, it was a red point of light. Then it grew into a planet filled with mountains, canyons, ancient valleys, and enormous storms. The crew entered orbit and began preparing the landing vehicles. The chosen settlement area was located near a broad plain north of Valles Marineris. Orbital studies suggested that large deposits of frozen water existed beneath the surface. The first landing vehicle carried Armstrong, Aldrin, and a group of engineers and scientists. During the final descent, the navigation system began producing incorrect readings. The landing craft drifted away from its planned location. Fuel was running low, and the ground below was covered with rocks and steep slopes. Armstrong took manual control. Just as he had done on the Moon, he searched for a safe landing area while the fuel level continued to fall. The vehicle reached the surface with only seconds of power remaining. The landing was hard, but the craft remained intact. When the crew opened the external cameras, they saw red soil, distant hills, and a pale sky. For the second time in history, human beings had reached another world. But unlike the Apollo astronauts, the Prometheus crew had not come only to explore. They had come to stay. The settlement was named Ares. At first, it consisted of several metal modules connected by pressurized tunnels. The modules were covered with Martian soil to protect them from radiation and extreme cold. A small nuclear reactor provided electricity and heat. Mining equipment began drilling through the frozen ground in search of ice. The first successful extraction produced only a small amount of water. To the settlers, it was more valuable than gold. Water could be used for drinking, agriculture, oxygen production, and rocket fuel. It meant the colony might one day survive without supplies from Earth. The first year on Mars was a constant battle. Temperatures fell far below freezing. Fine dust entered machines and damaged moving parts. Electrical systems failed without warning. Every journey outside the settlement placed human lives at risk. A small tear in a pressure suit could kill a person within minutes. Ares faced its greatest early crisis during a dust storm that lasted 73 days. The sky became dark. Solar panels produced almost no energy. Communication with orbit weakened, and the cooling system of the nuclear reactor began to fail. If the reactor shut down, the settlement would lose heat and electricity. Several crew members entered the storm to repair the damaged system. Visibility was reduced to only a few meters. The workers depended on safety cables to find their way back to the habitat. After hours of work, the cooling system was restored. The colony survived, but almost one-third of the equipment outside the main settlement was damaged beyond repair. The next supply ship was still many months away. The settlers learned to reuse everything. Broken vehicles were dismantled for metal. Damaged wires were repaired. Packaging material became insulation. Containers were turned into tools and storage units. On Mars, nothing could be treated as waste. Every object was a resource waiting for a new purpose. The colony's first greenhouse was built beneath layers of transparent shielding. Potatoes, wheat, beans, and several vegetables were planted in treated Martian soil. Most of the first crops failed. Some plants died because of chemicals in the soil. Others could not survive the low light or unstable temperature. But one small green plant continued to grow. The settlers gathered around it as if they were witnessing a miracle. For the first time, a living green leaf had grown in Martian soil. In a world of red rock and dust, that leaf became a symbol of the future. Years passed. New missions arrived from Earth carrying settlers, machines, animals, and supplies. The population of Ares increased from 48 people to more than 100, then several hundred. New tunnels were excavated beneath the surface. Large greenhouses were built. Water extraction systems melted thousands of liters of underground ice. Carbon dioxide from the Martian atmosphere was processed to produce oxygen. The colony began manufacturing basic metals, glass, building materials, and replacement parts. Dependence on Earth slowly decreased. Ares was no longer a temporary base. It was becoming a city. People married on Mars. Children attended school beneath the surface. Scientists developed crops that could grow with less water and weaker sunlight. Artists created music inspired by the sound of Martian winds and the endless red horizon. A new culture was beginning to form. On September 12, 1986, the first child was born on Mars. Her name was Ada. Her birth marked a turning point. Until that day, every person on Mars had been born on Earth. Ada belonged completely to the new world. As more children were born, doctors discovered that their bodies developed differently. Mars had only a little more than one-third of Earth's gravity. The children grew taller and lighter. Their muscles and bones adapted to the lower gravity. They could move easily across the settlement, but no one knew whether they could survive for long on Earth. To them, Earth was not home. It was a distant planet described in stories. They learned about oceans from recordings. They watched videos of rain falling on forests. They studied animals that had never walked on Mars. Many found it difficult to imagine a world where people could stand outside without pressure suits. The first generation of Martian children looked toward Earth with curiosity, but not with homesickness. Their home was Ares. As the colony expanded, Neil Armstrong gradually transferred leadership to younger settlers. He had become older, but he continued visiting the observation room. From there, he could see Earth as a small point of light. For him, that distant light represented everything humanity had ever created. It contained his family, his memories, and the world from which every Martian settlement had begun. Communication between Mars and Earth continued for years. Scientific information, political instructions, private messages, and cultural recordings traveled between the planets. But over time, the messages from Earth changed. Reports spoke of economic collapse, resource shortages, climate disasters, political instability, and military conflict. Governments began questioning the cost of supporting Ares. Some wanted the colony closed. Others wanted to use it as a military outpost. Several nations demanded control over Martian minerals and technologies. The settlers began to question their relationship with Earth. They had built Ares with their own hands. They produced their own water, food, air, and energy. Many residents had never been to Earth. A growing number began to argue that Mars should govern itself. The disagreement had not yet become a crisis when something far more serious occurred. On March 7, 1994, the regular transmission from Earth suddenly stopped. At first, the communications team assumed it was a temporary failure. Solar activity often interfered with signals between the two planets. But hours passed without a message. Then days. Ares directed every antenna toward Earth. Thousands of signals were transmitted on military, civilian, scientific, and emergency frequencies. No one answered. The colony attempted to contact American stations, Russian stations, European facilities, Asian networks, orbital platforms, and the remaining lunar bases. There was only silence. The final information received from Earth had been confused and incomplete. A massive solar eruption had struck the planet's magnetic field. Satellites failed. Power networks collapsed. Communication systems across entire continents stopped working. Some reports suggested that military warning systems had begun producing false attack signals. Fragments of emergency transmissions referred to uncontrolled launches, explosions, and widespread fire. The last complete message received by Ares contained only a warning. The people of Mars were told to remain where they were. Then the connection ended. For weeks, the colony waited. Some believed that Earth's communications infrastructure had simply been destroyed. Others believed that a global war had begun. A few feared that human civilization on Earth had disappeared entirely. Ares could not accept uncertainty forever. The colony's leaders approved a mission to investigate. One of the old Prometheus spacecraft remained capable of reaching Earth and returning to Mars, but its fuel reserves were extremely limited. A crew of 6 was selected. Michael Collins, now much older, volunteered to command the mission. He was joined by pilot David Chen, Dr. Layla Demir, engineer Samuel Brooks, biologist Anna Volkov, and Ada, the first generation born on Mars. The expedition was named Homecoming. For Collins, Earth was the world where he had been born. For Ada, it was a world she had only seen in recordings. The Homecoming spacecraft departed Mars carrying enough food, oxygen, water, and fuel for a single journey to Earth and back. There would be no second attempt. During the long voyage, Ada studied the archives of Earth. She watched recordings of people walking beside oceans, children playing in rain, and cities filled with light. She saw forests stretching across mountains and clouds moving above blue water. It was difficult for her to understand that so much life could exist on one planet. As the ship moved closer, its instruments began detecting weak signals. They were not human conversations. They were automatic warnings transmitted by damaged satellites. The messages referred to radiation, atmospheric contamination, quarantine zones, and emergency evacuation. The closer the ship came to Earth, the more disturbing the signals became. None of them contained a living human voice. After 6 months, Earth appeared through the observation windows. Ada had expected to see the blue planet from the old recordings. Instead, the crew saw a world covered in brown and gray clouds. Smoke hid large areas of the continents. Dark stains spread across parts of the oceans. The polar ice had been damaged, and no city lights appeared on the night side of the planet. The planet was still physically present. But the world they remembered was gone. Earth had never been only a sphere of rock and water. Earth had been its cities, forests, oceans, animals, cultures, and billions of human lives. From orbit, almost all of those things appeared to have vanished. The crew entered Earth orbit and began scanning the surface. Radiation levels remained dangerously high in many regions. Most major cities had been destroyed or abandoned. Large areas were covered by ash, toxic chemicals, and uncontrolled fires. The evidence suggested that the disaster had occurred in several stages. First, the solar storm destroyed satellites and power systems. Then military warning networks began producing false information. Governments believed they were under attack. Weapons were launched. Nuclear explosions destroyed cities and infrastructure. Power plants, chemical facilities, oil fields, and industrial regions burned without control. The atmosphere filled with smoke and radioactive material. Civilization did not disappear in one instant. Technology failed first. Then governments collapsed. Then food production stopped. Finally, the natural systems that supported human life began to fail. The homecoming crew searched for survivors. They transmitted messages on every frequency available. They monitored underground facilities, old military stations, emergency shelters, and remote islands. No answer came. There was still a possibility that small groups had survived below the surface. But the crew could not find them. They connected their spacecraft to an abandoned orbital station. Inside, the air had almost completely escaped. The station was dark, cold, and damaged. Personal belongings floated through the corridors, but there were no people. In the control room, the crew found a final recording. The message had been created by one of the station's last survivors. It explained that conditions on Earth had become irreversible. Small human groups might still exist, but global communication had been lost. The message identified Ares as the last stable human settlement. It declared that Mars was no longer a colony. Mars had become the continuation of humanity. The recording ended with a warning. The people of Mars were told not to return until they were strong enough to survive without Earth. They were asked to preserve Earth's memory but not to repeat its mistakes. The homecoming crew remained silent as the message ended. They had traveled millions of kilometers to find the birthplace of humanity. Instead, they had found its grave. The spacecraft did not have enough fuel for the return journey. The abandoned station contained a small reserve, but the transfer equipment was badly damaged. The crew attempted to extract what remained. During the operation, a frozen fuel line broke. A large amount of fuel escaped into space. The mission nearly ended there. After hours of emergency repairs, the crew recovered just enough fuel to attempt a return to Mars. There was no margin for error. The homecoming spacecraft left Earth orbit. No celebration followed the departure. The crew watched the planet become smaller behind them. For Collins, the moment was a final farewell. The world of his childhood, his family, and his memories would never welcome him home. The crew sent a final report to Mars. They confirmed that Earth still existed as a planet, but human civilization had been destroyed. No verified survivors had been found. The mission would return to Ares. The journey back became a struggle for survival. To conserve fuel, the engines were used only for essential course corrections. Life support systems operated at minimum power. Food was rationed. Water was recycled repeatedly. The crew spent long periods resting to reduce oxygen consumption. During the final month, the heating system failed. The temperature inside the spacecraft dropped below freezing. The crew abandoned several sections of the ship and gathered inside one small compartment. When Mars finally appeared, only a few days of oxygen remained. The spacecraft entered Mars orbit, but its main antenna had been damaged during the fuel accident near Earth. The crew transmitted a weak emergency signal and waited. For hours, there was no response. Their oxygen continued to fall. Then Ares detected the signal. A rescue vehicle was launched. The homecoming crew returned to Mars exhausted, weak, and carrying the most devastating news in human history. Hundreds of settlers gathered as the crew arrived. The reunion brought relief, but no celebration. Everyone in Ares understood what had been lost. Their families, nations, histories, and the entire civilization that had created the Mars mission were gone. It was possible that small communities still survived on Earth. But Mars did not have the ships, fuel, or resources needed to launch a rescue operation. Attempting another mission could destroy the colony and end humanity completely. Ares faced the most important decision in its history. Some settlers believed every available resource should be used to search for survivors. Others argued that the colony was still too fragile. Without careful planning, one failure could kill everyone on Mars. For days, the people debated their future. At last, Neil Armstrong addressed the colony. He reminded them that Earth had been their beginning and that its memory would never disappear. If life remained there, Mars would one day return. But the colony could not sacrifice the last stable human society in an emotional attempt that it was not yet capable of completing. Mars had been created as an extension of Earth. Now it had to become something more. Ares would no longer be governed as a distant colony. It would become an independent human world. The settlers voted to accept the decision. The name Ares was replaced. From that day forward, the colony would be known as New Earth. A new system of government was created. Water, oxygen, energy, and essential food production could not be owned by individuals or private groups. Scientific knowledge would remain available to all citizens. Weapons capable of destroying entire settlements were permanently forbidden. Every child would be taught history as well as science. The people of New Earth would learn not only how human civilization had risen, but how it had destroyed itself. The settlers understood that forgetting the past would make repetition inevitable. During the decades that followed, New Earth expanded across Mars. Additional settlements were built near underground ice deposits and mineral-rich regions. Networks of tunnels connected cities beneath the surface. Large nuclear and solar energy stations powered factories, farms, and research laboratories. The population grew from hundreds to thousands. Then from thousands to millions. The people of Mars began changing the planet itself. Factories released carefully controlled gases into the atmosphere. Orbital mirrors directed additional sunlight toward selected regions. Ice beneath the ground was melted and transported into protected basins. The temperature increased very slowly. The transformation required generations. No person who began the work would live to see it completed. But the project continued because the people of New Earth no longer planned only for their own lifetimes. They planned for centuries. Neil Armstrong died before the first open lake appeared on Mars. His final years were spent teaching young settlers about the Moon, Earth, and the first landing. To the children, the Apollo mission sounded like ancient history. But every city on Mars existed because of the questions first asked inside a dark lunar tunnel. 42 years after Armstrong's death, the first stable lake formed beneath a protected atmospheric dome. Trees grown from the last surviving Earth seeds were planted along its shore. When artificial rain fell for the first time, thousands gathered to watch. Ada had become an elderly scientist. As the water touched her hands, she remembered the recordings she had watched during the journey to Earth. For the first time in her life, she understood the sound of rain. Mars was still red. Its atmosphere remained too thin for humans to breathe freely. Most people still lived beneath domes or underground. But the planet was no longer dead. Green areas appeared around settlements. Streams flowed through protected valleys. Artificial clouds moved above expanding lakes. The night side of Mars began to glow with city lights. Humanity had lost its first world. But it had created another. More than a century after the destruction of Earth, Martian observatories continued watching the old planet. Its atmosphere slowly began to clear. Temperatures stabilized. Fires disappeared. Green areas returned in isolated regions. Most scientists believed that nature was recovering without humanity. Then, during a routine observation, a radio telescope detected a weak signal from Earth. The signal repeated at regular intervals. It was too organized to be natural. Someone on Earth was transmitting. No one knew who had survived. They might have been descendants of people who entered underground shelters before the final war. They might have lived for generations without knowing whether humanity existed elsewhere. They might believe they were the last human beings alive. The people of New Earth immediately began preparing an expedition. This mission would be different from the first homecoming voyage. Mars now had advanced ships, large energy reserves, and the ability to support a long search. The objective was not to reclaim Earth. It was not to establish political control or extract resources. The objective was to find the people who remained and reconnect the two branches of humanity. The new spacecraft carried a symbol showing two worlds. One circle was blue. The other was red. A single line connected them. As the ship rose above Mars, the people below watched from cities, farms, laboratories, and observation domes. The planet beneath them had once been described as cold, empty, and impossible to inhabit. Now it contained forests beneath glass, artificial seas, schools, music, history, and millions of human lives. The journey that had begun with a single step on the moon had transformed the destiny of the species. Humanity had lost Earth, but it had not lost itself. A handful of explorers had crossed the darkness and protected the knowledge of an entire civilization. They had survived storms, hunger, isolation, and the destruction of everything they once called home. They had refused to allow the end of one world to become the end of the human story. Perhaps humanity had never been meant to belong to only one planet. Perhaps Earth had always been the beginning rather than the final destination. A world could be destroyed. Cities could disappear. Civilizations could collapse. But as long as memory, knowledge, and hope survived, humanity could begin again. Earth had given birth to the human species. Mars had given it a second chance. And beneath the red sky of a once dead planet, the second age of humanity had begun.